welcome back to Lycanhood Reads. Here we are at the end of the year. It's kind of mid-December right now, and I'm trying to get through my end of the year videos. Last year I ended up doing a Gayest Reads of 2021 video, and I kind of debated on whether to do that this year or not, but I wrote down 5 choices, and I figured, yeah, let's just go ahead and knock this one out as well. So without further ado, here are the 5 queerest or gayest books I read in 2022. First off is going to be maybe a little bit of a untraditional choice, and that's going to be a book of essays and nonfiction called The 2000s Made Me Gay. This is by Grace Percy, and this is a book that I read on audiobook. It's super short nonfiction, series of essays, and I loved it. The 2000s Made Me Gay. I'm 28, so I grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I just absorbed all of the pop culture of that time period. But the pop culture and the media of the 90s and early 2000s has irrevocably just shaped like who I am as a person and my tastes, and that's obviously true for a lot of other people my age, including Grace. She talks about her queerness, and the way that she sort of discovered that and her experiences with queer media, or media that maybe should have been queer, and sort of she talks about the way that queer people were treated in the 90s and the 2000s in pop culture industries. So we're talking about like actors, authors, just celebrities in general. She talks about Paris Hilton and Lindsay Lohan, and just sort of how seeing the way that these queer people were on screen in the news, in magazines, in the larger conversation, just seeing the way that they were treated, the things that they were going through, the things that they were saying, how that affected her and her own experience with being queer in the early 2000s. And just sort of the media that was important to her at the time, the stuff that drove her nuts, that got her excited, that kind of the queer awakenings, that she went through and things like that. And so it was just a super relatable read, very similar to Girls Can Kiss Now by Jill Gilowitz, which was on one of my best books of the year list. I think those two go really well together. I read them sort of back to back because I just needed more of the same stuff. So yeah, this book is great. It's a super short little read, and I would suggest that if you're gay that was born in the 90s or the late 90s, then this is gonna really speak to you. And my second choice is of course going to be The Hourglass Throne by K.D. Edwards. That is book 3 in the tarot card sequence. I'm not gonna go through the whole spiel again because I've talked about the tarot card sequence a lot. But this is the 3rd book in the trilogy. It's supposed to be, so even though K.D. Edwards is writing a longer series of the tarot card sequence, this is supposed to be like the first trilogy. So this is a little bit of a period sort of on this era, this first wave or phase or however you want to call it, and it was a bang. So The Hourglass Throne is equal parts fun and devastating. We're getting all of the great payoff from the relationships that K.D. Edwards has been building up throughout the first 2 books, and all of that payoff is here. And while K.D. Edwards came to give us love, he is all powerful, and he took some away as well. So this book has its devastating moments, but it's also extremely fun, extremely heartfelt, and it's gonna have you by the neck, let me tell you. Number 3 is going to be A Marvelous Light, and that is by Freya Merske, I believe is how you say her name. So you could say that both books in this series, which I think is called The Last Binding, they could both fit easily in the spot. I read A Marvelous Light in November, so it's coming kind of at the end of the year. But I really enjoyed it. It is very gay, like so gay. And it's more so of a fantasy romance than it is just straight up fantasy or even urban fantasy. It takes place in a sort of Edwardian England in which there's a secret underground society of magicians. And our main character, Robin, stumbles into this society due to a clerical error and finds himself falling for the very uptight and gruff Edwin. So it's really enjoyable. It's pretty much a straight up romance, really, with a little bit of murder mystery thrown in there as well. The world building is just enough, not too much, and the dynamic between the mains is enjoyable. Everything about it's enjoyable. I found that the smutty scenes were steamy, and it was just, I liked it. It was a fun read. It was a sort of maybe cozy's not the right word, but it was a comforting read. And the sequel, A Restless Truth, is about, it's kind of adjacent, so we're still following the same conspiracy throughout both of these novels, but the main character switches from Robin to his little sister, who has her own sapphic adventure on a boat. So a murder mystery on a boat, a little bit like Death on the Nile, I guess. And I just finished that one a couple of days ago. I gotta say, I didn't like that book quite as much as A Marvelous Light. I enjoyed A Marvelous Light a little bit more, but they're both really good. They're both really gay. Super fun to read. And number 4 is again gonna be a sort of combination. It's the Bright Falls books by Ashley Herring Blake. So the first book is Delilah Green Doesn't Care, and the second book is Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail. So I read both of those this year. Astrid Parker just came out in November, so that's pretty recent. And they're both great. They're both fantastic. These are contemporary adult romances. So rom-coms, I guess you could call them, even though some of them do have a little bit more heavy subject matter than others. Delilah Green, the first book, is fantastic. It's about Delilah Green, who is a sort of bohemian photographer who ran away from her hometown the first chance she got, and ran away from the sister that she wasn't close to. And she returns to her hometown for said sister's wedding and ends up falling in love with her sister's maid of honor. So that was really something. And it's really fun to read just because I like the dynamic between the two main characters, the Delilah and her love interest, but also the dynamic between the entire group of queer characters. So it's a small town in like Oregon or something, and let me tell you, it's a very gay town. I don't know if it's really that gay in Oregon, but this town has just got the bisexuals coming out the wazoo. So the second book, Astrid Parker, it's about Delilah Green's uptight sister whose marriage falls apart, or sorry, whose engagement falls apart, and she has to sort of rebuild her entire life in this sequel. So both of those books, extremely gay, lots of queer characters, just sort of straight up rom-com, but you don't have to worry about there being too many immature misunderstandings or anything like that. What I really enjoyed about this series is sort of the emotional maturity that it was coming from, and these characters are dealing with some very genuine obstacles to their relationship rather than just manufacturing, you know, drama. So that's really what I enjoyed about it. And the fifth and final gayest book I read this year is going to be Silver Under Nightfall, which was also on my best books of 2022 list. So Silver Under Nightfall is a fantasy novel that takes place in a very aristocratic fantasy world in which there are vampires, but they're also humans, and we have to kind of deal with them in a very diplomatic way. The main character is a vampire hunter, and he ends up having to team up with a count and a countess, a vampire couple, to solve this sort of conspiracy that's happening in their world. And the vampires are extremely thirsty for him in all the ways. They want Remy so badly, and he has trouble coming to terms with that as they go on this adventure. So you can expect there to be polyamory, you can expect there to be a lot of action, a lot of cool fight scenes. There's going to be political intrigue, of course, and it can get steamy at times as well. So I really enjoyed that one. There's not nearly enough polyamory for my liking in the kind of sci-fi fantasy genres. So anytime I find it, I'm super excited. And something I can't say very often is that this book kind of met all my expectations. For just based off like the cover and the synopsis and everything that I was hearing about it, it just kind of hit on every level, and that's pretty impressive. So those are the 5 gayest books that I read in 2022. Let me know which really gay books you read this year down in the comments. I would love to hear about them. I hope everyone has happy holidays and a safe new year. I will see you in January. Thanks.